Hi folks, you're with Tassless Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about tyranny, because the globalists are quite clearly, unmistakably imposing a tyrannical structure all across the Western world today. And it's very ideological, so it's, if you like, a revisiting of the imposition of communism, and the key indicator of this is it's done without the consent of the people. But I want to talk about tyranny as it goes back thousands of years ago, to say, as it was mentioned by Aristotle, and then later on by Roman historians. Now we can look at tyranny, either people such as Aristotle describing, if you like, the organizational architecture of tyranny, or at least some aspects of it, and then looking at those that may talk about tyranny along the lines of, well, what can we do to stop it? So rather than defining it in detail and examining it, it's considered to be in itself a bad thing. Therefore, if we do these things in terms of public institutions, democratic infrastructure, this is how we can guard against tyranny occurring. Now, the definitions of tyranny sort of may differ. For example, there were those who said that Julius Caesar was a tyrant, but was he a tyrant in the misuse of power, or was he a tyrant in as much as he had power? And was Caesar more a risk to the creating the possibility of tyranny rather than being an actual tyrant at the time? So there are those who would say, well, if Julius Caesar was allowed to continue as he is, then tyranny will naturally ensue. There are also others, including, by the way, Aristotle suggests this, that democracy, and it's a little bit harder to determine, does he mean democracy as in 51 out of the 100 people vote for something but 49 don't? Or 49 vote for something different? Or is he talking about, say, a more Republican type of democracy, where the people get the right to choose their government, but where power is more distributed as it is in a Republican type sense? It's still democracy, still people voting, but is it simple majority or Republican? Now, if we move to the more modern era and we look at how should power be used, and if you like, some subtle redefinitions of tyranny, and if power is used for the maximum good of the maximum number of people, then even though power may be concentrated in the hands of the one or few, does that mean that it's tyranny, or would you call it something else? As there is no actual abuse of power, or not abuse of power in the sense that the government merely exists for the enrichment or the aggrandizement of a sovereign, say king, for example, or for some small select group or oligarchy. Exactly how many people should be involved in government before it ceases to be concentrated power for the benefit of the elites? So there are still unanswered questions. Now, if you move through from, say, Machiavelli, in the 1400s and 1500s, you move through to the more modern, say, the French revolutionaries, and you can look at the people around that general era, even looking at some of the Descartes and processes of reasoning which would lead one to determine what is a tyranny and then what is bad or good. And you look at John Locke in Britain, and even other writers, Edmund Burke and so on, again, talking about it from different perspectives. What is tyranny? What is a bad tyranny? What is abuse of power? How can these things be guarded against and prevented? Karl Marx, for example, believed that the capitalism was a tyranny, or a form of tyranny, in his view at least, that oppressed the masses. And because a minority of the population controlled the majority of wealth and the means through which the rest of the citizenry could survive or prosper or eat or have somewhere to live, that therefore, as power had been concentrated and that the maximum benefit derived to a smaller group of people, as in a minority, it was therefore tyranny. So these different determinations of what tyranny was, not that they were vastly different, they were still about who holds power and is that power determined to be in some way abusive or to the enrichment of the minority. And that those definitions can move around a little bit, but the basic architecture of tyranny remains the same as Aristotle would have determined. That hasn't really altered. So nor will it ever alter if gaining of power without the consent of the people, then the methodologies don't change. Now, you can go and say the Bolshevik Revolution, where power is seized at the point of a gun and then enforced equally at the point of a gun. Now, that's tyranny, pure and simple. The communist ideologues wouldn't see it that way, but okay, so we're killing a few people or we're killing millions of people, but those are the bad people anyway, so we don't need them in this new world order we're creating. And we're creating a paradise. We're creating a nirvana. We're creating paradise on earth. So we're allowed to kill tens of millions of people because look at the objective here, paradise on earth. Who wouldn't want that? So there's also different outlooks in terms of how tyranny is imposed, whether it's some gradual process or whether it's, again, in the case of the communist revolutions, whether it be in China or Cambodia or the Soviet Union, where it's imposed at the point of a gun. Now, as soon as your government system or social order is determined at the point of a gun, and people don't agree or have not agreed, then obviously it's a tyranny. But we're seeing the same thing today. The globalists are imposing the new world order upon the people without the consent of the people. The people have not consented to mass migration. The people have not consented to gay pride marches. The people have not consented to self-hatred being pushed through the education system. None of this has received the consent of the people. Those who purport to be consenting on our behalf are controlled by the globalist cabal. They are the elites making decisions without the consent of the people. The candidates that we supposedly vote for in elections are all globalist selected and approved candidates. So there is no, as in the communist system, you could vote for sure, no problem with that. But all the candidates for electoral office were all the globalist central secretariat approved candidates who all would parrot the same party line. So the idea of different political parties with substantially different prescriptions and policies and views and attitudes they don't really exist anymore in the Western world. Now you'll get outliers that will appear like a Donald Trump in the United States, but that's a rarity. And the structure of the political system that allows a Donald Trump to come along is aggressively being closed off by the globalist cabal, so they don't have to compete with someone who's outside of their orbit of control. But coming back to tyranny, now I made just a couple of notes, so I'll refer to them here, given the complexity of the subject. And again, coming into the more modern writers like the Rousseaus and so on, the French revolutionary people, into Karl Marx. You could even include Hegel in these sorts of discussions, from varying one side or the other, or trying to get ahead of the curve or behind it. They're all discussing, covering power, as in governmental power, and thus looking at, from one angle or another, this tyranny. I'm not sure much can be really added to this. So coming back again to Aristotle's original discussion, which is really the base architecture, and to get 2,300 and whatever years ago, nothing's really changed. That architecture, what is tyranny? How do you define it, and how is it used, and how is it promulgated, and so on? This is the same. Nothing's changed. Now, technology, of course, has changed, but otherwise, nothing's changed. So, how is power used, and what is its primary purpose? Is it for the public good, the maximum number of people, and to improve their lives? So now Stalin was a tyrant, but he clung to the communist ideology of everyone's equal, or pretending to, ideologically at least, with maniacal brutality. Now, you can say the objectives were somehow pure, not that I would agree with that, but in an ideological sense, one could argue that. But nonetheless, it's still tyranny. If you have to kill people who don't agree with you, then that's not exactly the consent of the governed. Now, Aristotle suggested that democracy was really a again, this is not just simple majority, but democracy where people get the right to choose their government, or vote to choose their government. Democracy is a transitory stage that inevitably leads to tyranny. Now, this is something that other writers have mentioned, that before tyranny, you will always get democracy. That is, people have the right to vote to choose their government. That from the bowels of democracy will come tyranny. I don't agree with that. I do see the point they're making, that once you have democracy, you need to have an exceptionally high trust society with exceptionally high levels of probity and belief in the institutions, the independent courts, the rule of law, due legal process, absolutely clean, squeaky clean elections, and so on. That those systems that protect the democracy or are essential elements of it, then again, democracy is that the government is by the will of the people. A Bill of Rights or rights, and you almost don't need rights as long as you have agreement. Everyone's in agreement that the rule of law and due legal process will exist, and that those in government are public servants. As long as there's agreement on that, as in, not one or two people agree, but everyone's in agreement, which means you have a very high trust society, and a belief in each other and in the civis and your service and obligations to it. Once you have that, then democracy is automatically protected because it has no enemies. Everybody agrees. Now, when I say everybody agrees, you may disagree with policy or policy prescription, or no, I think we can do it better this way. You may have disagreements, and many of them, by the way, in that. And there's nothing wrong with people wanting to say, well, I think we should have a different form of government. But to do that, I must convince the people of its merits. If you can't convince the people of its merits, then people won't vote for it. So, an independent and free media. These in the West, we've completely lost that. The media is just a cheer squad for the globalist project and nothing more, and to denounce anyone that questions or disagrees with the globalist project. That is its only purpose in the modern day West. Again, a sign of tyranny, by the way. So the idea that democracy is inevitably going to lead to tyranny, again, just repeating, I don't agree with that. But what has happened in the West is there's been a breaking down of agreement between the institutions, the law, the application of law, independence of the courts. All these things have been broken down in some way, and that by importing large numbers of people from other cultures, very, very low trust cultures, then the social trust, the high levels of social trust, which were absolutely essential for a functioning democracy where the will of the people decides the government, then down all the very institutions that are necessary to support a democracy. And again, I use democracy only in the wider context of the will of the people, not trying to choose between simple majority or Republican or anything like that. Also, the distribution of power. Now, the American founders saw this, as indeed did the English aristocracy. They realized that distribution of power and no centralized power was much more simple, because you never know who was going to take over control tomorrow. So if bad guys took control tomorrow, you didn't want them having every single lever of power, and you wanted the ability to remove it. Now, a tyranny can still be achieved, and we see this today. The globalists have taken over the the political party machines of all the major political parties, the Greens, Republicans, Democrats, Labor Party, Conservative Party, they're all controlled. Only the small minor parties aren't controlled by the globalists. All the public service institutions have been infiltrated by the globalists, who now control all of them: education departments, legal departments, radical activist prosecutors, radical activist judges. It's all been dismembered along ideological lines. So the media, of course. So there isn't a single institution left in the West that is not on the side of the globalists. Now, the globalists want to impose a new world order, and to do it without the consent of the people. Therefore, it ticks every box of tyranny. But it's an indication of just how successful they've been in removing all the bulwarks of democracy and the rule of law and so on and so forth, or due legal process. And they've very successfully done this. Now, it's happened over time. When I first saw the signs of this as I became old enough to recognize it, when I first saw signs of this in the 1980s, say, I'm just a really young guy at this point, I wasn't sure that I had it right. I thought, no, it can't be right. There's no way our politicians would allow this to happen. There's no way judges would allow this sort of corruption. There's no way prosecutors, there's no way the media would, and so on and so on. I just considered it so impossible that it simply couldn't happen. I didn't believe that social trust in the West or in Australia, the first example I could think of, I didn't believe social trust could break down to such an extent. Not that there weren't, elements of lacking or minimal social trust, but in those key issues, we all pretty much agreed. Now, there were those who would say at the time, well, the law only exists to protect property. Now, there are these arguments, and these arguments have been had over time. Does the law exist to protect, or does the political system exist to protect property, or is it to protect the rights of people? Is it to protect the rights of people to prosperity? Is it to protect private property against the privations of the government? And so you can sort of have a look at those and those issues and debate those, and that's fine. But coming back to the original concept of tyranny, as Aristotle would define it. And remember, he's looking at examples in ancient Greece of the small city-states where you've got relatively small populations. If we look at tyranny, how many people have to be involved in government before tyranny ceases to exist or not be a threat? Is it more than 0.5% of the population, more than 1%, more than 2%? What sort of people are there? Is it the best and brightest people? Is it the dumbest? Is it the greediest? Is it the most fickle? Is it the most brutal and hateful? What sort of people are getting into government? You could say is an issue, but if merit is the method by which people gain places in the governing elite, then it's far less likely that people will suffer. The populace will suffer because everybody on merit has a vested interest in maintaining the balance and the equilibrium, the distribution of power, and they all can see the dangers of power concentrating. Today, power is concentrated almost exclusively in the hands of the globalists, and they are abusing that power most horribly. And that's something we need to be alert to. What's interesting, I guess, to me as I look over this is why is it that humans must be, it's almost like a curse of some sort, must be cursed to have to relive and, go through again the same mistakes that were made 2,500 years ago. Why is that? Why can those mistakes not be learned from? Even the Middle Ages, I think around 1000 AD, a Persian philosopher, wrote verses that those who do not understand the past must relive the past. Omar Khayyam, the moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, and nor all thy piety nor all thy wit can lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash away one word of it. They're talking about the inevitability of you can't change the past, but the the number of philosophers that have mentioned this curse over time of having to relive the mistakes of the past. Those who don't understand the past are doomed to relive it, and this is very much the case today. And it seems quite astonishing that so much of our supposed elite, many of whom are quite undeserving. I mean, would you say, Ilhan Omar and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I mean, do they deserve to be in those positions? Have they earned their place there as thought leaders? And so, no, of course not. They're just stooges for the globalists, and that's now a concept of puppeteering elitism that is relatively new, I think, to the discussion around what is tyranny. So the actual tyrant isn't the one you're looking at. The tyrant is the one behind the curtain who has the puppet out front. You've been a Tassus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.